Good evening, everyone. And I'm sorry I don't speak Malayalam. I wish I did, because this is such a rich district in such a beautiful state where the political economy is almost the opposite of what exists around us in the rest of the country. So I wish I could speak this to you in a language that is easier. But unfortunately, I'm Malayalam illiterate. So I'm going to have to speak in English and rely on people here to be able to, Srijit and others here, to interpret what I'm saying. I'm going to start with the present, with where we are at now. This week, as the Supreme Court hears a petition that me and two other people have filed to reverse the remission granted on our 75th year of independence to Bilkis Bano's rapists and the murderers of people in her family, which was celebrated as part of our 75th year of Independence Day celebrations. I think we are all at a point where we're asking ourselves, where are we as a country? How did we get so lost? And I think the fact that they were released is one thing. The fact that this was part of Independence Day celebrations means that this was done with us in mind as an audience. We, the people of India, that now are the consumers of a politics of hate. We, the people of India, that live on a diet of hate. We have curated this experience for ourselves. And we cannot look away from our own role in the creation of this politics. And that's what made me work on the book that I did. Because what we have today is the product of many decades of us kind of turning our politics on its head and looking at it in reverse. Looking at it from the reverse of the idea that India built itself on when Nehru made his Tryst with Destiny speech. And 75 years ago, we wrote ourselves a constitution in which we said we are a secular socialist republic. What has happened from there to bring us to this point when, on the 75th year of our independence, the rapists of a Muslim woman that was part of a political pogrom in Gujarat that took place in 2002, her rapists and killers of her family are released, and then Hindu thugs in the state of Gujarat garland these convicts. I think the reason they were garlanded and photographed is the problem. Because this was done with a view to show us all this performance that we've created. And it made me actually, when I was a journalist in Gujarat, I have to go back to that point of time. I was a journalist in Gujarat the year after the 2002 riots. I was a television journalist for NDTV. And everywhere I went, people would say, you will not understand why we were part of this politics of hate, why we were supporters of the mob. And by we, I mean the majority of the Hindu middle class in Gujarat said, you, the outsider from Delhi who's gone to Gujarat, will never understand why we've done this, why we supported this. So that made me think that the real work that we need to do to understand how we've come here in 75 years is we need to look at why we have done this to ourselves. Why is it that people are finding this politics of hate so attractive? What makes people gravitate towards this like magnets? What makes people say, kill the Muslims, celebrate the rape of a Muslim woman? What has made us as a society want this? Because it's easier for us to say it's the politicians that are doing this to us. But the politicians want votes. So if this is what is giving them votes, then this is actually a statement about us and not them. And that's what we have to look at. So in 2003, the year after this anti-Muslim pogrom takes place, let me contextualize the pogrom first for some of you who may not remember what happened then. In 2002, there was a train coming back to Gujarat from Ayodhya. And on one of the compartments of that train, there were people who'd occupied that train compartment illegally from the Vishwa Hindu Parishad. There were people traveling there ticketless. They had come back from doing kar seva, or what they believed was the duty of Hindus to be able to take bricks from their villages to build the Ram Mandir at Ayodhya a decade after the Babri Mosque was destroyed. So when they were occupying this train compartment illegally, the train was traveling from Ayodhya to through a town called Godhra in Gujarat. And someone pulled the chain of the train, and the train stopped abruptly. We don't know exactly what happened at this railway station in Godhra, but there was violence, and it is alleged that it is possible that a girl was molested at this station. She could have been Muslim, and therefore the Muslims in this town were incensed with the Hindus in this train compartment, and either side burning rags were thrown in, burning rags were thrown back out, and we don't know really what happened, how that bogie caught fire. But that bogie caught fire, and 59 car sevaks were burnt to death. But what we do know that happened after this, definitely, for sure, that this event of the Hindu car sevaks burning on the 27th of February 2002, we know. We also know that the same night, Hindus fanned out across 16 of the 24 districts of the state of Gujarat, planning to take revenge on all Muslims across the state of Gujarat the next day. We also know that when these mobs did this across the state of Gujarat the next day, there was this lustful, vengeful desire to kill, rape, pull fetuses out of pregnant women, murder children. And this was done with the support of not just the mobs, but people in general. What happens is, when we look at these crimes in isolation, we make the mistake of thinking that this is one person going out there cutting and killing someone. The problem with political genocide and murders of this scale is the fact that it is a mass of people. It is an entire society that is supporting this, either actively by taking part in the mob, or through large groups of people going out there and participating in it. And that is the thing that we need to look at. How did this go from being something that we thought we had left behind at the partition, to then this rearing its ugly head from time to time in India, and 2002 being an example of this, to becoming part of the political mainstream, where we are now celebrating the release of such criminals on our 75th day of independence. 75th year of independence. So what I wanted to look at is, I kept talking to civil society people, journalists, other journalist friends, and I said, we have been working on stories on the victims of this violence, but who's going to look at the perpetrators? The real story lies inside their minds. Unless we understand why this violence has happened, we're never going to be able to do anything about it. And I had this question in my head, but I failed to find the answer until the answer accidentally fell into my lap the following year. And I met somebody who told me how to look at hate differently. He is someone who was a student in 2002 in Gujarat when these anti-Muslim pogroms were fanning out all across the state. He was in his hostel, and people from Hindu mobs came to his hostel and they said, you know, you have this window of opportunity. You can go and loot this Muslim shop. You have half an hour. After that, the police will come and they'll catch hold of you, but for half an hour, you can go and participate in this. And he said, you know, at that point of time, Gujarat was cut into two equal halves. Those that were being cut and killed, and those that were out there celebrating. And I was with the half that was out there celebrating. So he said, I didn't want to steal anything from these Muslim shops, but I didn't want to miss out on the action. So I went along with my friends. So this is someone who was a student, who was doing a master's in liberal arts. While this violence went on around him, he participated by going with the mobs. As soon as the violence finished, his degree was over, this man was looking for a job. And the only place he could find employment, you know, he didn't study medicine, he didn't study law, he didn't do an MBA. So for a liberal arts master's student, the best place to get a job with a decent salary was in the NGO sector. So this man applied for a job in an NGO. And all the NGOs in Gujarat at that time, after the violence against Muslims, were helping rehabilitate Muslims. They were doing nothing else. So after cheering on for the death and destruction of Muslims, this man finds a job in an NGO that is rehabilitating them. And that is when the story starts getting, from his point of view, very disturbing, and from an outsider looking at his story, very interesting. Until this point of time, coming from a dominant caste, this man never actually had to interact with Muslims on an everyday basis. Because he never had to interact with Muslims, he never really needed to understand the ideas that he was carrying around in his head about Muslims, whether they were fiction or fact. So he believed that Muslims were jihadis, they all had 4 wives, they're inherently prone to violence because they cut goats in their backyards during Eid. These are the ideas that he had grown up with. And there was no reason for him to believe anything else. Except now he was having to deal with Muslims every day. And the people who had actually cut and killed them and broken their legs and raped them were Hindus. So he was very disturbed with what he saw. It was like his reality had turned upside down. Who were the people who were violent? Was it him or them? And then he couldn't live with himself. He went through this period of hating himself and self-loathing. He couldn't look at his own face in the mirror. He couldn't sleep at night. And then when he couldn't stand it anymore, he confided in a friend, that he confided in his boss in the NGO, and he didn't realize that the NGO had actually recruited him precisely for this purpose. They wanted people who were hard radicalized by Hindu groups and who had participated in the violence to actually help rehabilitate the Muslims and try and transform this hate. By the time I met this man, he had actually undergone a complete transformation from being at the edge of the mob to a left liberal atheist. And when I met him, I couldn't believe that it was possible for something like this to happen. How can hate like this transform? And if it was transforming, then I realized that as a journalist, I didn't understand the first thing about hate. And I also didn't understand that hate is something that could change. And I also saw that by fixing hate in one place and describing it as something that is static, I was also making it stand in one place. I wasn't allowing it to move. And I was saying, okay, this is the reason why the masses of the Hindu middle class in Gujarat was telling me that I will never understand what it's like for them to be people who supported the mobs. And the political actors, people who were in power in the state of Gujarat at that time, understood the mob. And they told them, you don't need to carry any guilt. This is why they have been voted in again and again. Because we have failed to look at hate as something that can move. We are not giving ourselves the political imagination to allow this hatred to escape. We are going on putting it back in those boxes and forcing it to stay inside that space. And when we force the hatred back into this space, it just gets worse and worse and bigger and more defensive. Think about it. How many of you have adolescent or teenage children? Or how many of you live around obstinate children? And they will say, if you tell them to do something, most kids, their response will be, I don't want to do this. And what do? You use reverse psychology to try and make them change from where they are. You don't tell them, I can't stand you. Because the minute you do that, your adolescent, teenage daughter will definitely do what you don't want them to do. So if we are an adolescent society that is very insecure about how we are, especially a burgeoning and rising middle class, we don't want to be told your ideas are disgusting. But are we giving people who are insecure about their identity the chance to change? Do we even believe that they are not sure of themselves, but they're pretending to be sure of themselves because they don't want us to be better than them? So they invert everything that we say. And through this man, that is the big observation that I made about hate. That hate can change. But that was only one part of the story. That just whetted my appetite for trying to understand how this can exist. This is one man who's like the everyday middle class person, like some of you sitting here and definitely me standing here. But that's not all of the story. What about people who did the kind of crimes that we are reading about having been done to Bilkis today? The second person I wrote about in my book was one such person. He raped and killed Muslim women and children, including yanking the fetus out of a pregnant woman and killing the fetus and then raping her as part of the 2002 anti-Muslim pogrom in the city of Ahmedabad on a street called Naroda Patia. This man called Suresh Jadeja then went on to brag about his crimes, which is why I'm bringing back the comparison to Bilqis's rapist being garlanded, the bragging, the celebration. Suresh Jadeja bragged about his crimes to the press, who were recording him secretly, but he bragged about it anyway, even otherwise. And he said, I raped Muslim women till they were pulverized to pickle. And he did this while being married to a Muslim woman. Now, when you look at the outer kernel of the story, it doesn't make any sense. But if we stop there and don't understand what makes Suresh brag about what he did. He's bragging about what he did because he has an audience. So Suresh is not just one person. Suresh is carrying out the secret desires of many of us Indians who want to do this but don't have the guts to do it. So we are outsourcing our violence to this one person and secretly celebrating behind his back. So Suresh is actually an embodiment of many of us. And that's why it's important to understand how Suresh got to be where he was. So Suresh's story has many layers. The first layer, the outer layer, is the society he came from. He came from a society called the Charas. They were a tribe that had suffered 1.5 centuries of social discrimination by the time we get to 2002, when he raped and killed Muslim women. So the Charas were a community they were a nomadic tribe, and they were stigmatized by us ever since the British ruled us. Now the British, after the 1857 War of Independence in India, when the British were almost overthrown, they were terribly scared of this happening again. And the people they were very scared of were people who moved as traders, as nomads from one district to another and from one state to another seasonally, selling things, seasonal sharecropping. So they were scared of them, and so they drafted a law called the 1871 Criminal Tribes Act, according to which if you were born in any one of these 198 tribes, including the Charas, the community that Suresh came from, you were a criminal at birth. And this means that if you were born a Chara, you couldn't access the system of law and criminal justice because you were a criminal. So then the Charas, because they were confined to prison-like camps for so long, they became criminals. They began to take pride in becoming criminals. So that by the time independence happened, Indians, after we became free in 1947, we actually forgot that there were people languishing in prison, labeled criminal tribes by the British. So it took us 6 years to wake up and remember that these people were still in prison camps. So they actually celebrate their independence 6 years after us. They were unfree until then. And the police in cities like Ahmedabad, whenever there's a crime committed, who is the easy target to pick up and throw in jail? Communities like the Charas. Or in Haryana, communities like the Thugis. The word Thug actually comes from Tyagi, Thagi, a criminal tribe. They are not criminals. We say, oh, these people have been criminals always. Actually, we are internalizing the conversations being fed to us by the British. So, the Charas in Charanagar, the men in particular in Charanagar were told that if you want to find a good bride, then you must brag about how many times you've been thrown into prison. You know, how big of a dada are you? How much of a don are you? So in Charanagar, growing up as a young boy, you had two choices. You could actually get outside of this stigma and try and become, let's say, a doctor, a journalist, a lawyer, an actor. Or you could color yourself darkly and become the baddest of the bad. That's what Suresh did. But that only explains how there was a structural violence that we as a society had meted out to these communities. And so there was an appetite for a certain amount of violence within the community that was normalized. However, that doesn't explain why Suresh did what he did, because he had two brothers. They didn't do this. Many other Charas never did anything like this. So alongside this structural violence that Charanagar partly represents, there's also the personal history of somebody like Suresh. He had polio as a child. Now if you have polio, very often you will have one bad leg. Your muscles don't work. You have muscular dystrophy. So that happened to Suresh. And so his father, they believed, there was a folk tradition that if you basically take the blood of a freshly killed pigeon and smear it on the area of the muscle that doesn't work, that it will start working again. So his father laid a trap at the village in Charanagar in order to catch a pigeon and basically bathe his son's thigh with that blood. While he set the pigeon trap, the father fell into the trap himself. And when the father fell into this trap, his own leg got damaged. So he screamed and yelled and he said, "This bastard child of mine, this sister fucker child of mine, I don't know what I have done to produce this. This is not my child. This is not my mother. This is not my son. I don't know who this whore of a woman has slept with. She's produced this beast from somewhere. This is not my child." So this 3-4-year-old boy with a damaged leg, growing up in a society where anyway going to prison and violence was normalized, also is taught how to hate himself. He grows up with this idea that he is nothing, that his father can't love him, that he has a bad leg and that he doesn't have the right to any love. This is what he grows up with. His father used to say this out onto the street, which is how I know of it, because people have heard his father say this to them. Now, into this mix comes Hindu organizations like the Bajrang Dal in the 1990s that are looking for local dons and leaders to try and help them build up their campaign to say, let's destroy the Babri Mosque in Ayodhya. It is the home of Ram. Let's carry out love jihads to separate Hindus and Muslim couples. Suresh was caught up in all of this because now it gave his violence a political purpose. It gave something that was personal. His self-hate, his self-loathing now acquired a public purpose. And so Suresh the Chara became Suresh the Dada, who was protecting people in his area. Supposing you were a Chara and you were a landlord and there was somebody who was your tenant who was not vacating their premises, you could go to Suresh and say, have that guy bumped off or have his legs broken so that he, pays the rent. So if you were under Suresh's protectorate, you were safe. So Suresh was a local Dada. Now he was a local Dada with a political purpose. And at this time that he was also being indoctrinated by the Hindu hard right, his sister ran away with a Muslim man. And Suresh couldn't stand it. He said, how can this happen in my own family? So, because women are regarded in commodities in many parts of India, he said, they have taken one woman from my community, I am going to take one from theirs. And he goes and he seduces this stunning looking Muslim woman, then kidnaps her and forcibly marries her. But, the truth is always stranger than fiction. So after doing this, Suresh actually fell in love with her. And he couldn't believe his luck that she fell in love with a man who he doesn't like himself. So he can't believe that somebody can like him. So he starts to attack her, rape her, gouge the flesh out of her shoulder, throw her out of the house with the baby, threaten her all the time. Because he's jealous. He thinks that she's sleeping with other people because how can she like him? How can she possibly love someone when he doesn't love himself? And so you can see how a man growing up in an environment like this could come to 2002, spend the day on the 28th of February going out with mobs, raping and killing Muslim women, coming home for lunch, telling his Muslim wife, please wear a bindi so that people don't identify you as Muslim. Then going out and raping some more Muslim women and then coming back and having sex with his wife at night. But you can see how all of this was possible when you go to the backstory. You can also see how neglecting communities that want recognition and identity and to be included in the mainstream, how all of us excluding them, forgetting that these communities require us to look at their pain, to understand that it is not okay for you to grow up imagining that if you've gone to jail 5 times, you'll get a better bride. But we are normalizing, by shunning these communities, by invisibilizing their pain, we are also normalizing a certain amount of structural violence in our society. And so it's important to look inside these spaces to see what part of Suresh is life we have played in creating Suresh into the person that he is now. Because we have definitely all played a part. And that is why the Anatomy of Hate is about our role told to you via these characters. Real, living, breathing, real people. Not a figment of my imagination and not an invention, but real, living, breathing people. And however, if we look at Suresh, and we forget about the story I told you before this, about Pranav, who actually transforms from hate, then we're not learning the lessons that we actually need to about this politics of hate that is engulfing us all. And that is that we have got to be able to understand that hate is not a fixed thing. And for that, the best example I can give you is actually the third character in my book, who is a tribal from an economically disadvantaged part of Gujarat. He was a Bhil. I've renamed him Dungar in my book in order to protect his identity. He is someone who burnt down houses of Muslims in Gujarat, and then later he rebuilt them. Partly because he felt guilty and he couldn't deal with the nightmares he was having from having burnt these grocers' shops down from whom he used to buy his groceries every day, and who were the uncles and aunts in the area around him, Muslims, but who when he was very poor, they used to say, okay, you've come to buy a kilo of rice, here, take 2 sweets. He couldn't deal with the fact that he'd done this to them. But he was also somebody who needed a better sense of self. And as a tribal man from the Bhil tribe, in a place where his own identity was in question because he didn't feel good about the tribe he came from. In school, he was constantly made fun of for his big nose. He ran away from school and he ran away from his home. His father was an alcoholic. He used to beat him. So he thought all Bhils are terrible like my father. They're all alcoholics. They're terrible people. My own tribe is full of shame. So he went and escaped to his school teacher's house, who was an upper caste Hindu man, a religious man, and he started to copy him. Then he started to be very good with reading all the Hindu texts. Dungar tells you the story of how someone who came from an extremely poor background persevered, went to school, went to college, got himself a degree from a very poor tribal home. But then he had to come back and become a daily wage agricultural laborer working on other people's farms because he didn't own any land and he came from a very poor family. So despite his education, we may say, oh, get yourself an education and you will stop being violent. It's all these unemployed youth out there. But I'm telling you, Pranav had a postgraduate degree. Dungar had a BA. Everybody else in his village had dropped out after class 5. None of his other siblings went beyond class 6 or 7. How did Dungar, after a bachelor's degree, end up working as farm labor on a subsistence economy? You know what changed his station in life? It was the violence of 2002. Until that day of February the 28th, when he went down and burnt those houses of Muslims, the Muslims in the villages around them were big traders from much more respectable economic and social backgrounds than Dungar and his tribalness. So they used to look down upon him because there was no running water in his village. So he couldn't have a bath. So he used to stink. So most of these Muslims would say, you sit there down on the ground. You will not look us in the eye. We'll sit on chairs. You sit on the ground. So he was always humiliated. On that one day, by making the Muslim victims, he had reversed the power equation entirely. Suddenly, he was all-powerful and the Muslims were beneath him. So what does the violence do? We imagine that it does nothing, but it gave very tangible gains to a man who otherwise, despite his degree, despite education, despite trying to use the system, had got nothing out of the system. And when did his economic fortunes turn? He started to get government contracts for his association with the government, with the VHP, with the Bajrang Dal, with the BJP. He managed to get work contracts from living in a kacha house made of mud. He managed to build a marble house for himself. He managed to get cars. He managed to get all kinds of contracts. Now, why would someone like this want to live on a subsistence income? Why would someone want to not reverse the social humiliation that he has faced when he has an opportunity to? And if we want Dungar to grow up differently, then why are we not going into small towns and villages and providing people with an alternative ascending staircase out of the dark, out of a subsistence economy, out of social discrimination. If we want our politics to change, then the lesson to learn from observing these people for me has been that I need to stop living the way I do in a big fat city like Delhi, and I need to go and move to a place where there is discrimination and try and create an alternative universe for people to move out of their societies of discrimination and economic dependency and despondency. Otherwise, I have no business complaining about the system if I am not investing something new in it. So basically, after I wrote this story, I'm living inside this story. I never moved out of this story. I'm still living inside this story, where I am now using it to create an alternative idea. I've moved out of Delhi to a small district in western Uttar Pradesh called Shamli, because it is the discrimination, caste, religious and gender in this place that gives me a chance to test this idea on the ground and see if it is possible for us to build back the health system, to build back ways of making people feel comfortable, have a better identity by allowing them to form a fraternity of people composed of different castes and different religions working together. How do you make that happen? So one of the things that we are trying as an NGO that I've developed over the last 2 years, we ran a health campaign. Sounds very simple, but we were in the middle of the pandemic and people were dying in their homes because the public health system in this district was broken. So we said, okay, if you continue to try and find a doctor or go and access the public health system on your own as your caste or your religion, nothing's going to happen. This is why you need to band together. We ran a signature campaign and we got 6,000 signatures from people of different castes and communities and sent them to the district magistrate and said, will you set up free health camps? This is a district where there is a deficit of doctors. But she agreed, because of this public pressure, to set up free health camps, bring in private doctors, 4 teams of 4 doctors to set up health camp after health camp. So people observed that, oh my God, if we actually get together not as Nayars, not as Valmiks, not as Sayyads, not as Ansaris, but if we get together as people from different castes and religions working together towards something, our lives can actually improve. We're getting free health. These are some of the ways, these are some of the learnings I have had. Because I've worked on the anatomy of hate, I'm trying to look at what are those gaps that we have created together as a society and trying to find solutions for them. That's what I have to say today. Thank you very much.